For 10 long years, Chris Doumitt stood shoulder to shoulder with Parker Schnabel through every frozen night and every ounce of gold that came out of Scribner Creek. But then, without warning, he was gone. No announcement, no farewell episode, just silence. His trailer spot sat empty by sunrise, the coffee mug still half full, his name stripped off the dozer door. The crew whispered quietly that week. There'd been no fight, no contract dispute, not even a hint of tension. It was like he'd just decided the season was over for him and walked away. But by the time Parker got word, Chris was already off-grid. And when asked, Parker simply said one line that would fuel months of speculation. He's got his reasons. Those 5 words started the storm. Rumors spread across the camps. Some said Chris had struck an independent deal. Others whispered he'd stumbled onto something he didn't want the cameras to see. But no one expected what came next. Because just a few weeks later, a set of satellite images revealed something impossible. A small but active mining site deep in the Yukon wilderness, miles north of Indian River. The area wasn't listed under any of the major claims. No known operator. But the machines, the gear, even the silhouette walking the pit line. It was unmistakably Chris Doumitt. Locals who flew supplies out that way confirmed it. He was running a one-man operation. No crew, no investors, no network contract. Just a lone miner with his old pickup, a modified wash plant, and a dream too quiet to share. The site he'd chosen was known as Cedar Ridge, a steep, forested slope that hadn't been touched in nearly a century. But what raised eyebrows was how he got it. The claim wasn't registered through any modern mining channel. It had been quietly transferred through a defunct company that dissolved decades ago. When someone finally dug into the records, they found the paper trail led back to Cedar Mining Company, 1931, a venture that had vanished after a mysterious cave-in and was never reopened. Most miners would have stayed away. Chris didn't, because tucked away in an old storage unit near Fairbanks, he'd found something the rest of the world had forgotten existed. A small, oilskin-wrapped notebook belonging to his grandfather, H. Doumitt, 1937, covered in mud, grease, and time. Inside were sketches of old sluice runs, survey grids, and handwritten coordinates. But there was one phrase repeated in bold across multiple pages. Vault line, too rich to haul. It wasn't just an old prospector's tale. The notebook described a pocket of gold so pure the early miners refused to process it through the crude 1930s wash plants. They sealed the shaft, marked it on a private map, and left it buried under a company that went bankrupt. For most, it was a dead legend. For Chris, it was unfinished family business. He packed the notebook into a weathered canvas bag, loaded his truck, and drove north without telling a soul. No cameras, no sponsors, no safety team. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing a ghost, one that had haunted the Doumitt name for nearly a century. When he reached Cedar Ridge, he found the ground just as his grandfather had described it, black clay beneath glacial till, and a narrow run of coarse gravel that shimmered under light. He set up a test cut, started the old pump, and let the wash plant roar to life. The gravel looked ordinary, gray, dry, lifeless, but when the final pan hit the sunlight, the gold lined the rim like a liquid halo. It wasn't flake gold, it was chunk, coarse, heavy, exactly like the old notebook described. And that was just the beginning, because buried beneath that pay dirt was something no one had seen since 1937. If you love uncovering the secrets behind the Yukon's biggest legends, make sure to hit like and subscribe, because this story changes everything you thought you knew about Gold Rush. The first cut rolled through the plant in silence, just the rattle of the old sluice and the hum of the pump echoing across Cedar Ridge. Chris worked alone, hour after hour, shoveling and hauling, his breath frosting in the morning air. The gravel was dull, Gray, fine, lifeless. Nothing about it looked special. But when he finally shut down the plant and poured the final pan into the light, the tray flared gold. The flakes didn't drift like dust. They clung heavy to the metal, rich and oily, running the rim like melted sunlight. He stared at it for a long minute before speaking aloud to no one. "You did it, old man." By the end of 48 hours, he'd cleaned out 120 ounces. More than most crews pulled in a week, with 20 men and state-of-the-art gear. He stacked the bottles of gold in his truck bed and felt that quiet, dangerous rush only old miners understood. Proof that something hidden had finally spoken back. But the ridge wasn't finished with him. Late that night, as he scraped another layer of pay dirt, the excavator bucket hit something that didn't sound like rock. A deep, hollow thud echoed through the pit. He jumped out, dug by hand, and unearthed the corner of an old wooden crate wedged under frozen gravel. The boards were black with rot, iron bands still clinging to shape. He pried it open carefully, half expecting it to crumble apart, and froze when he saw the markings burned into the side. H.D. Company. Inside lay relics of another age, rusted drill bits, a weather-eaten revolver, and, wrapped in oilcloth, a tin box sealed tight. He cracked it open and unfolded what was inside. A fragile map, ink-faded but legible. It showed the ridge exactly as it stood beneath his boots, but deeper lines carved through the earth below, each labeled with his grandfather's handwriting, "Vault Line." Notes in the margins read, "Too rich to haul. Leave for the next Doumitt." Chris set the paper down on the crate and let that sink in. This wasn't some forgotten company asset. It was a message, passed through blood, buried for nearly 90 years. His grandfather hadn't failed here. He'd hidden something. He knew then that the pay dirt on the surface was only the cover. The real motherlode lay somewhere in those shafts drawn on the map. 3 tunnels carved under the ridge, untouched since 1937. That's where the too rich to haul gold waited. And if anyone else ever found this map, the secret would die again. The next morning his radio crackled to life for the first time in weeks. A friend in Dawson, one of the few who still kept tabs on him, spoke in a low voice. "You've got a problem, Chris. Someone leaked coordinates from a recent geoscan. Says your claim's off the charts." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Within days, trucks and survey drones started appearing on nearby ridges. Rival scouts from 3 companies began knocking on the doors of old mining offices, trying to buy up the surrounding land. The ridge was waking up, and word was spreading fast. Then came the call he wasn't expecting. "Chris." It was Parker Schnabel. The first time they'd spoken since that silent departure months ago. Parker's tone wasn't angry. It was cautious. "You're working the ridge, aren't you?" Chris didn't deny it. The pause stretched. Parker finally said, "That ground's not right. My granddad's logs mention it. Said it caved in on an entire outfit in the 30s. That's the same ridge that swallowed men once." Before Chris looked over the pit, at the mist curling up from the damp clay, at the crate half buried beside his machine. He knew Parker was probably right. The ridge had history written in bones and broken timbers. But something in him had shifted. He answered quietly, "Then I'll dig where they stopped." The line went dead. From that moment, Cedar Ridge was no longer just a hidden claim. It was a battleground of time, blood, and gold. Helicopters passed low in the mornings, snapping photos of his cut. Rumors said companies were offering 7-figure deals to buy him out. He didn't flinch. He spent his nights tracing those tunnel lines on the map, memorizing every curve and depth, preparing to find the entrance his grandfather sealed. The Yukon had seen countless fortunes rise and vanish, but none like this. Because Doumitt wasn't chasing a payday anymore. He was chasing a legacy buried beneath the earth, a family secret paid for in dust and silence. And as snow began to fall again across the ridge, he knew he was getting close. The ground itself seemed to hum under the tracks of his excavator, as if something beneath was waiting to be found. Each pass of the bucket bit deeper into soil that felt alive, pulsing with trapped air and echoing history. The hum grew louder, turning into a low vibration that crawled through the cab frame. Chris tightened his grip on the controls, easing forward. The third cut began like any other, steady, methodical, but the ridge had changed. The frost-hardened ground trembled with every scoop, breathing heavier, as if warning him off. Then, with one final swing, the earth gave way. The excavator's front end dipped violently, metal shrieking as it collapsed into an unseen hollow. Chris slammed the kill switch just before the machine pitched nose first into darkness. Dust and ice filled the air. When it cleared, Chris saw it. Beneath him lay a perfectly preserved timber shaft, its support beams still locked in place, old rail tracks glinting faintly under the beam of his headlamp. The air was stale and heavy. His oxygen meter dropped fast, and the methane alarm began to scream. He pulled his respirator on and climbed down, boots sinking into decades of untouched dust. The deeper he went, the quieter everything became. The sounds of the surface disappeared, replaced by a slow drip of water somewhere ahead. His light caught something pale near the entrance, a scattering of bones still wrapped in torn mining clothes. The old helmets, lamps, and shovels were all intact. They'd never made it out. The story Parker told was true. The ridge had swallowed men once before. Among the debris, something metallic caught his eye. He brushed away dirt until the object revealed itself. A small gold bar stamped Cedar Mining Company. 1936. The edges were smooth, the stamp still sharp. It wasn't a nugget or dust, it was refined. Someone had already been pulling finished gold out of this place when it collapsed. He pocketed the bar, tightened his gloves, and followed the rails deeper into the shaft. Each step echoed like footsteps from another era. The deeper he moved, the more the tunnel began to widen, until the narrow passage opened into a massive underground chamber. The walls were streaked with quartz, glowing faintly under his light, veins of gold threading through like veins under skin. He stepped closer and saw one section that shimmered brighter than the rest. An exposed pocket of coarse, untouched gold fused into the quartz face. He took his drill, pressed it against the rock, and started a small core cut. The moment the bit broke through, the wall seemed to bleed gold. Fine flakes poured out like sand, cascading across the floor in sheets of dull yellow. He shut off the drill and just stared. This wasn't just a pocket, it was a reservoir. Chris worked in near silence for 2 days, extracting only what he could carry. He used buckets, shovels, and the old rail carts still resting on the tracks. The cleanup was staggering. When he finally weighed it all, the total exceeded 1,000 ounces, nearly $1.5 million in just 48 hours. No one had ever pulled numbers like that from the Yukon with a single man and a handful of rusted tools. He didn't film it, didn't tell the press, didn't even share it with the few miners who still called him a friend. The only proof he sent was one photo, a gold bar resting on a shovel, texted to his family with no caption. Then he shut off his phone. Weeks later, rumors started to spread again, this time louder and harder to contain. Someone from a local assay office leaked preliminary reports showing extraordinary purity and unprecedented yield. Core samples from Cedar Ridge were averaging over 800 grams per ton. To put that in perspective, most commercial mines considered 10 grams per ton a jackpot. The numbers were so high that government auditors quietly stepped in to verify. Everything came back clean. No fraud, no errors, just impossibly rich earth. The appraisers who managed to visit the site under confidentiality agreements estimated the total reserve could exceed $75 million, possibly more if the second and third shafts matched the same composition. It was a discovery that rewrote modern Yukon mining records. Back at Scribner Creek, Parker's crew was stunned when the news finally reached them. None of them had believed the whispers that Chris had gone off alone and outperformed every crew in the territory. When the figures hit the local mining registry, there was no denying it anymore. Chris Doumitt, the man who once welded sluice boxes and hauled samples for Parker, had outproduced every modern operation in the valley, by himself. Calls started pouring in. Investors wanted in. Discovery Network reached out, offering him a solo series, a new show built entirely around the legend of the lone miner who struck the richest vein in Yukon history. But Chris refused every offer. He ignored the cameras, the contracts, and the sudden flood of attention. He wasn't chasing a spotlight. He'd already found what he came for, the truth buried under Cedar Ridge and the legacy his grandfather left behind. Everything else, the records, the fame, the fortune, was noise. He kept working in silence, deeper and deeper into the ridge, with that old map taped to the side of his dozer, the words still visible in faded ink. Too rich to haul. Days blurred into nights. The air grew heavier with each descent, and the walls began to groan like they remembered what was taken from them. The gold was endless, but so was the risk. Still, Chris kept digging. For him, danger wasn't a warning. It was confirmation that he'd reached the place generations before him had turned back from. By the time the ridge had fallen quiet, weeks had passed. The engines still ran, but their echo no longer filled the valley. Chris worked mostly underground now, speaking rarely, recording brief notes on a handheld camera. Not for TV, not for anyone watching, but for whoever might one day find what he couldn't finish. The footage that would surface later showed a man no longer chasing numbers or fame. The gold was there, beyond measure, but now he was mining for answers, not ounces. In one of the final recordings, his voice was calm, steady. He said, "Everyone thought I came up here for money. That's wrong. I came to finish what he started." He looked down at the worn map spread across a workbench, the same map his grandfather had drawn 88 years earlier. He died believing this ridge was cursed. But it wasn't a curse. It was unfinished work. I just needed to prove that he panned the camera across the chamber walls, white quartz glittering with veins of gold, and then aimed it back at himself. This gold isn't mine. It's a story buried too long, and I think I've finally reached the end of it. The last seconds of the footage showed coordinates scrawled on a sheet of paper, followed by the words, "For the next Doumitt." That was the final message anyone ever heard directly from him. 2 weeks later, the ridge changed again. Temperatures spiked, the frost line melted, and the entire lower valley began to shift. At first, it was just small slides, gravel rolling down slopes, fissures opening and closing, but then, without warning, Cedar Ridge collapsed. Tons of rock and ice broke loose from the upper slope and thundered down into the valley. The landslide buried everything, camp, equipment, tunnels, everything, beneath a wall of mud and debris that stretched half a mile wide. When rescue crews reached the site 3 days later, they found chaos frozen in time. The generators still ran. The excavator idled half-buried in gravel. A pot of coffee still sat steaming beside the wash plant. But there was no sign of Chris, no footprints leading away, no struggle, just emptiness. The shaft entrances were sealed, crushed beneath 30 feet of collapsed earth and ice. Officials declared the ridge unstable, too dangerous for recovery. The Yukon Mining Authority marked the area as condemned, closing it off to all future exploration. Even Parker, who arrived quietly days after, couldn't get clearance to dig. He stood at the edge of the debris field for hours, helmet in hand, staring at the spot where his friend's camp had once been. Someone said he muttered, "He actually found it," before walking away without another word. Weeks turned into months. Snow fell again, sealing Cedar Ridge beneath a white sheet as if the earth itself had chosen to bury its secret. The miners moved on to new seasons, new episodes, new claims, but whispers lingered, the kind of whispers that only grow louder the more people try to silence them. Then, months later, an unmarked envelope appeared at the post office in Haines. No return address, just Parker Schnabel's name scrawled across the front in faded pencil. Inside, there was a single item, a gold nugget the size of a thumb, wrapped in tissue paper, and a handwritten note. 4 words. For the next Doumitt. The handwriting matched Chris's. The nugget was sent for testing. What the lab found didn't make sense. The purity level registered at 98%, almost chemically perfect. Natural Yukon gold rarely exceeds 85%. This was something different, denser, heavier, almost alien in its refinement. Experts cross-checked it with samples from known veins, but none matched. It was as if it had come from an untouched geological layer, one that no one had ever recorded. News of the analysis leaked to local press, and speculation exploded. Some claimed Chris had discovered a new type of deposit, a supervein of nearly pure gold locked deep in glacial rock. Others whispered that he'd refined it himself, using an old process from the cedar mining days, techniques lost to time. But there was no proof either way, only that nugget, that note, and the silence that followed. Discovery reached out again, offering to build a memorial special around his final find. Parker refused the offer. He told producers that some stories shouldn't be mined twice. He kept the nugget locked in a small display case at his office, a constant reminder of the man who had taught him patience, craftsmanship, and how to listen to the ground. Meanwhile, mining reports from independent surveys began circulating. Satellite imaging of the Cedar Ridge zone, despite the closure, showed density anomalies unlike anything seen in modern Yukon data. Deep scans hinted that what Chris had uncovered was only the beginning, an estimated $200 million in gold still buried under the landslide. Layers of quartz veins intertwined with metallic signatures that went deeper than the tunnels ever reached. No one returned. The authorities forbade excavation, and the ridge remained frozen under ice and silence. Nature had reclaimed the claim as if protecting what lay beneath. Each spring thaw sent new runoff through the valley, washing tiny flecks of gold into nearby creeks, proof that the mountain still bled riches it refused to surrender fully. Prospectors who tried to sneak in never lasted long. The ground shifted without warning, swallowing equipment and erasing tracks overnight. Over time, Cedar Ridge became a story miners told around campfires. They spoke of the man who left $1 million crew to chase his grandfather's ghost, the one who worked alone and struck the richest pocket in Yukon history, then vanished with the mountain. His old notebook, the one marked Vault Line, was never found. Some believed it was buried with him. Others swore it was locked away somewhere, waiting for another Doumitt to come searching. Every so often, someone still reports strange readings from that area. Unexplained heat signatures, electromagnetic interference, or the faint sound of machinery under the snow, though no one's operated there in years. Old-timers say it's just the ridge settling, but those who knew Chris aren't so sure. What remains undisputed is that no miner before or since has ever replicated what he accomplished. His records still stand. The $75 million haul was just the surface, what he documented. The rest, whatever lies beneath that buried chamber, remains untouched. Cedar Ridge is silent now, but it's a silence that feels alive. The wind carries grit that glints gold under sunlight. Every spring melt uncovers fragments of timber, old rails, and pieces of history that belong to another time. And beneath it all, somewhere deep under layers of rock and ice, the tunnels of the Vault Line still exist, sealed by time, pressure, and fate. No one knows if Chris planned it that way. Maybe he did. Maybe he understood that the story mattered more than the treasure itself. Because for him, the ridge wasn't just a mine. It was a message passed through generations, a promise written in gold and silence. And even now, when the snow shifts just right and the light hits the ridge at dusk, some swear they can see the faint glint of metal beneath the ice, as if the mountain itself remembers the man who refused to leave it unfinished.